So, welcome everyone. My name is Charisse Bach, and I'm the Creation Justice Advocate at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. And we're also Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. And on behalf of our staff and all of our great speakers and breakout leaders today, thank you so much for being here to have this Oregon Interfaith Earth Summit 2022 today. This is our 9th annual summit and our second one that has been virtual. So although it would be wonderful to be with you all in person, I'm grateful to be part of a community that's willing to care for one another by prioritizing our community's health and safety. So thank you. And I'm really glad that we get to join together in this way and to be able to learn, grow, and connect spiritually across the state of Oregon. So thank you for taking time today to join us. The theme of this year's summit is Flourishing in a Time of Climate Crisis. And as the committee I was working with this summit on thought about this year's theme, we were thinking about climate resilience and wondering what the role of faith communities is in this work. How can people of faith work together toward the flourishing of our regional community and the community of all life? So that's really the question that grounds this summit. How can people of faith work together toward the flourishing of our regional community and the community of all life? So I hope you'll hold that question in mind as we journey together through this afternoon. The summit today is organized so that we'll have this first session where we'll first hear a prayer of invocation from Rabbi Eli Herb, words of wisdom and a song from Quiltman Same, who's an elder with the Warm Springs tribe, and then a plenary address from Avery Davis Lamb and Karen Bigelow with time for a few questions. And then we'll take a brief break and we'll come back for a panel of leaders in various denominations who will be sharing about faith-based climate disaster preparedness and resilience in Oregon. And you'll have the opportunity to select a breakout room to hear about local level stories of climate disaster preparedness and resilience efforts around the state. And then after another short break, we'll come back for a final session where you'll hear about climate justice advocacy that we do through Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. We'll share about our climate policy priorities for this legislative session, and we'll hear from Senator Deb Patterson about her thoughts on the faith community niche in Oregon's climate resilience. And finally, we'll hear from EMO's interim president, Andrea Cano, who will close our time with blessing. So as we begin this day, I want you to take a few deep breaths to really arrive here, to be in this moment. Be aware of your body in this particular place, whatever place you're in right now. And take a moment to think back over the last couple years and remember your experiences when we've had extreme weather events, fires, and other climate-related episodes in our communal life. What do you remember? What did it feel like to go through that? How did your faith community respond? What was challenging about responding in those moments? Consider that for a moment. And where and when did you see people helping each other? These are not easy topics to consider, and yet it's encouraging to have a community to work on these issues together with. So thank you for being a community that can come together and begin considering what our role is together in Oregon as a community of faith. So I invite you to pay attention to the wisdom from your own tradition and be open to the wisdom that you'll hear from the people who have gathered to share their thoughts today. So first, we're going to hear an invocation from Rabbi Eli Herb, who's the rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom in Salem. So we'll get that that invocation, ready to share and view that together. Sit back and listen.
Hello to everyone. Shavua Tov. I'm wishing you a good week. My name is Rabbi Eli Herb. I'm the rabbi of Temple Beth Shalom in Salem. I want to share with you as an invocation today a prayer that was composed by Rabbi David Seidenberg. Elohei Aruchot, natata biyadenu hakoach, shelo hayaken kamohu, merishit harat olam, lahafoch sidrei bereshit. Source of all spirit, all directions, all winds, you have placed in our hands power unlike any since the world began, to overturn the orders of creation. Ana ha'el ten lanu chochma, utvunot kapayim lerapot, et hashamayim ve'et haaretz me'avonotenu, yukum purkan lishmaya, k'dei sheyushpa alenu birkat hachama, l'chaim v'lo l'mavet, livracha v'lo liklala. Shene'emar eftach lechem et arubot hashamayim, v'harikoti lechem bracha ad bli dai, v'lo yashchit lechem et pri ha'adama. Please, source of wisdom and skillful hands, give us the wisdom and the skillful hands to heal the skies and the earth from our sins. May salvation rise for the heavens, that the blessings of the sun flow over us for life and not for death, for blessing and not for curse. As it says, I will open for you the expanses of the heavens and will empty out for you a blessing beyond what is enough, and earth's fruit will not be destroyed because of you. El malei rachamim, zachor lanu britecha, im kol hachaim, brit mei Noach, ufros sukat rachamim v'shalom, al kol minei hachaim v'aleinu. Akif kulam yuchasenu b'ziv hashchina, b'nachal aranecha tashkem, b'chol moshvotehem. Va'az nir'at ha'keshet be'anan, sas, umitpa'er, bagvo anin. V'yashuv eitz ha'chaim le'etanu harishon. God, full of compassion, remember your covenant with all life, the covenant of the waters of Noach. Spread a sukkah of compassion and peace over all of us, over all of life's species. Surround all our relations with Shekhinah's presence. Water them with your river of delights in all of their habitats. Then the bow will appear in the cloud, joyful and beautified with its colors, and the tree of life will return to its original strength. Utazakenu anachnu v'tze'etzaenu le'shev yamim rabim al ha'adama ki mei hashamayim al ha'aretz, so that we and our descendants may merit to live many days on earth, like days of the skies over the land. Baruch Chai ha'olamim, blessed be the life of the worlds. V'hayu beyom hahu e'eneh ne'um Adonai, e'eneh et hashamayim, v'heim ya'anu et ha'aretz. And on that day I will answer, swears Yodhei Vavhei, I will answer the skies, and they will answer the land. Wishing you all chizuk, strength and courage and support and connection to achieve great things through this conference, through this connection, through this convening, and the leadership to help pull all of us toward where we need to be very quickly in order to preserve as much life as we possibly can on our sacred earth.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Ellie for that invocation. And as I was preparing for this summit, I got to spend some time with Quiltman Same out at the Warm Springs Reservation. And there's not great internet access out there. So we made a video of his words of wisdom. And he was kind enough and generous enough to share a song with us. And to introduce this summit to him, I shared with him that it's a little bit uh, perhaps presumptuous for me as a white person, as a Christian, to host this summit on flourishing in a time of climate crisis in this place. Because my people have been the ones who came in here and took over this land and caused much of this climate crisis. And so it's my people who have the work of repair to do. And so it is as a tremendous gift that we receive his words for this summit to be inspired and challenged and reminded of the work that's before us. So let's listen to the words of this elder.
Hello, my name is Quiltman from some Nashville here. This is my long house, and I'm honored to be able to take part in this because the climate is very important right now. Very, very important. When I was younger, I used to hear various elders talk about prophecies about times is gonna get really hard when the trees start dying from the top down, when spider webs cover the earth, and the mountains and the wind and the water, everything starts reacting to earth. The earth starts reacting like we do when we're sick, when we get the chills and the fevers and our temperature goes up and down, and that's how the earth is now because of all this fossil fuels, all these mining, and something needs to happen because it's not good. It's not going to be good if it continues. Not for our children, not for us. Maybe some of us we won't make it to that time, but it's coming uh, without something going on to stop this, to rein in the fossil fuels and the logging, the mining. When my sister here, Cherise, told me about this, it took me back because my mother, she believed in Jesus and God a lot. She came full circle around. She came back to the longhouse and learned these things. But our songs talk about these times, these hard times that are coming, and we got to prepare ourselves for what's coming. We got to clean up ourselves, our minds, our bodies. We got to make ourselves right with the Creator because those times are coming, and it's coming really fast. If we could put our minds together, I guess we might be able to do something. For me and my people, we've always seen bad things out there in the world, and I think that all of us together, we're all family. We're all family. We might be a little bit different, but we're family because we're all children of this earth. She takes care of all of us. She always has and always will until she can't no more, and that's the times that's coming. We got to protect her, our mother. We got to do that, but we got to do it together. All colors, all different, all of us. The water is under attack. Here on my res, we're having a lot of water problems, and we live here where the freshest water in the world is, in the mountains here. This is where the freshest water in the world is, and we have water problems. See, that's a sign right there. So if you really got a good heart, keep it, and please spread that heart, that love, you know, spread that love around. I would like to do a song for y'all, and tell you all I love you guys, everybody. You know, take care of her, take care of your kids, take care of your kids, your old people, your elders. You know. Thank you.
With much gratitude, I send my thanks to Quiltman Same for those words and for that song that is native to this land. So let's take a few moments to let that song resonate in us. Let's hold that deep wisdom and powerful resonance with us as we journey through the rest of this summit. So with that, I will pass it over to Peter Serchenko, who is the chair of our Creation Justice Committee at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, to introduce our plenary speakers. Peter?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our summit. Thank you for being here. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speakers. In the interest of time, I'm going to drop their full bios into the chat, but Karen Bigelow and Avery Davis Lamb are the co-executive directors of Creation Justice Ministries. And I will turn the time over to Avery to begin the keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Peter. Thanks, Charisse, for pulling this together. And gratitude to Rabbi Ellie and to Quiltman Same for the introductory words and song. It's great to be with you all today. My name is Avery Davis Lamb, as Peter said, and I want to start us out today with a reading from the book of Nehemiah from the Bible, and I'll be in chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, even a fox climbing upon it would break down their wall of stones. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Have you ever found yourself standing among the rubble of your house, looking at the burned heap left over from a fire, or maybe the collapsed stones from an earthquake? Or maybe you've spent time abroad in war-torn areas, standing among the rubble of a home or a building that's been bombed, a place that's been razed by the evil forces of war. I have a moment like that. For me, that moment came when I was a child, walking through Coffeyville, Kansas, where I was staying with my aunt for a summer. Just a month before, a supercharged flood crested the local levee, and it flooded the local oil refinery. And 71,000 gallons of crude oil spilled out of that refinery and into the waters. It condemned all of the soil, all of the homes in its scorched earth path. And all through the summer when I drove through that town, the scars of that ecological and human disaster remained. I saw houses with oil lines 4 feet high and with X's on their doors condemning them. I saw a town in rubble. And I didn't realize it then, but this was my first experience of a climate disaster. And by now, this is an experience that many of our friends and families, and perhaps many of us, have experienced directly. Just this past year, we've been flooded with images of climate breakdown. In Texas, we've seen buildings collapsing under the weight of snow, bursting pipes flooding homes with freezing water, and rolling blackouts leaving millions in the cold. In the West, including close to many of your communities, we've seen charred homes in relief against fire-tinted orange skies. And in the Southeast, where I live, the images of flooded homes from hurricanes. Pick a name from the litany: Harvey, Irma, Florence, Dorian. And these natural disasters are anything but natural. The ability of these supercharged storms to reduce entire towns to rubble is the result of the way that our society has systematically mined God's creation, that it's reduced our earthly home to rubble. we're no longer standing in the time before climate change. We're no longer looking at it as an event to prepare for in the future. The question before us today is not whether we will prevent the destruction of our world, but how we might build structures of courage and of vision out of the rubble we find ourselves standing in. And like Nehemiah, we find ourselves standing in the rubble of our home, in the rubble of God's good creation. It's a rubble that's not entirely of our making, but it's a rubble that is our inheritance. So let me tell you about Nehemiah. Nehemiah found himself in a very similar position. In 586 BCE, a century before Nehemiah was born, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. The Jewish people were exiled from their homelands, forced by the Babylonians out of their holy city. And Jerusalem wasn't merely their home, it was the site of the temple. It was the place on earth where God came to dwell. So losing their city also meant losing the dwelling place of God. Now, a few decades after the destruction of the city, a more gracious emperor allowed the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland. But by Nehemiah's time, the city was still in rubble and ruin, and the Jewish people lived among the rubble of imperial conquest. And yet when Nehemiah, who was serving as cupbearer to the king, living outside of Jerusalem, when he heard from his brother about the state of his kin in the city, Nehemiah had a vision to see beyond the status quo. He could imagine reflected in the rubble of the walls of Jerusalem the possibility of the restoration of that once magnificent city. He had the courage to see the restoration of the Jewish identity in the face of imperial forces that opposed it at every turn. He had the faith to listen to God and to trust that a future of flourishing was possible even in the midst of destruction. So Nehemiah asked for release and for blessing from the king. He received it and he returned to Jerusalem and sought to rebuild the walls from that century-old rubble. He left his charmed position as cupbearer to the king to go to the land of his ancestors, going in faith to a city in shambles, hoping to rebuild a wall, and with it, a flourishing people. Now, this story of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem, it can be received differently in this era. Right now, walls are frequently symbols of national strength and of fascism, often designed to protect the right, or often the white, way of life from the corrupting other. And in an awful irony, these walls that are constructed by empire to maintain a way of life are holding out precisely those forces which empire has enacted through climate change. And what I mean by that is that as the worst polluters in the world continue pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, they construct walls to keep out the creatures, humans and non-human, affected and displaced by climate change. And these walls of empire are on display with every climate disaster. They're walls of privatized energy companies insulating and warming the wealthy in Texas while poor neighborhoods freeze to death. They're walls of private firefighters protecting the mansions of Malibu elites while the residents of Los Angeles lose houses and breathe in toxic fumes, unable to afford an air purifier. And of course, the wall snaking along our southern border, stopping the movement of people and of animals, a movement that is driven by the effects of climate change created by us. The structures of empire aim to absolve developed countries from responsibility for their role in the climate crisis, as if constructing a wall to keep out the effects of climate change will make it go away. I want to be clear here that that's not the wall that we're talking about. The Nehemiah's wall is characteristically not a wall of empire. It's a wall designed for people to move in and move out of. It's a wall with gates and with openings. It's a wall not built by the well-funded resources of the empire, but built from the rubble and built by the hands of the people. It's a wall of hospitality, a wall intended to promote the flourishing of life within and outside its borders, a wall that protects and cultivates that which is good, which is whole, which is peaceful, and yet is not isolated from the world outside of its borders. In chapter 3 of the book of Nehemiah, the author illustrates what I'm saying here. The author illustrates the grassroots effort of the people of Jerusalem. And what we read here is, in the 32 verses in that chapter, the names of some of the people who worked together. All in all, the author lists out 42 names of those who helped rebuild the wall. 42 names in one chapter. The entire chapter it's a testament to the people gathering, the people working together to repair the wall, the priests and the people, the rulers and the ruled, all of them working side by side, each making repairs to the wall in their own neighborhood. 42 people are listed by name in this chapter, a level of notoriety only granted to a prominent few in the entire book of Nehemiah. So why spend a chapter writing the names of people who worked building the wall? Perhaps the author of Nehemiah wants to emphasize that the rebuilding of this wall is not like the walls of empire. It's not built on the backs of oppressed people and slave labor. And it's not the names of technocrats and of tyrants who get remembered because of their feats of engineering. No, maybe the author of Nehemiah wants us to know that this is the people's work, that the people are standing side by side, rebuilding from the rubble of their own neighborhoods. It's not the work of the anonymous and well-funded military-industrial complex, but the hands of neighbors who we read, in the face of threats from all around, courageously work with all their heart. I want to tell you a story of another hospitable wall. This is a wall found in the homeland of some of the oldest Christian communities, the Orthodox churches of Ethiopia. Now, in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the proper way for a church to be a church is to be enveloped by a forest. The priests of this ancient Orthodox tradition, one of the oldest of all of our Christian traditions, recognize that the spiritual possibilities of a church don't arise solely from the interior space where one might encounter God, but through the invitation of creatures to be part of the sacred structure. It's not the work of human hands alone that build this sacred structure, but it's the work of God in partnership with all of God's creation. And what results from this belief and practice are called the church forests of Ethiopia. These forests are ecological arcs of biodiversity in a landscape flooded by deforestation. And when you look at images of this, when you see from above, the church forests are small pockmarks of green, just a few acres in size, surrounded by a landscape of brown. The juxtaposition is severe. These circles of lush green trees with domed huts in the center, surrounded by a desertified landscape. These forces of empire threaten in on all sides. As climate change intensifies, cattle ranchers are under more and more pressure to find suitable land for their livestock. And this is eroding the boundaries of the church forests. It's destroying the revered places of ficus and of juniper. And so in response to these increasing pressures, In response to the rubble of deforestation and the impacts of climate change, church leaders have partnered with a local ecologist to build a solution: walls around the forest. The idea was to extend the inner wall of the church, that which demarcated the Holy of Holies, outward, encompassing and protecting the forest from the forces of deforestation. Gathering stones from the desertified areas outside the forest, teams of robed priests and bespectacled scientists, they went about building a 3-foot-high wall around the perimeter of the existing forest. And the result has been absolutely amazing. Tree regeneration has accelerated. Biodiversity has increased. It seems that by keeping out those forces of ecological destruction, the wall has made it possible for the expansion of life on the inside, preserving a remnant with the vision that someday these species will have more habitat to reproduce in. People and animals are invited into the refuge, invited into a place for regeneration of life and regeneration of spirit. This story of the church forests of Ethiopia challenges us to ask, if the majority world church, like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, is Nehemiah, rebuilding the walls from the rubble of climate devastation, then who are we? In the scripture that I read at the beginning, the response of Sanballat to Nehemiah's work on the wall, it's something of a foil for the work of God and the people of God. Sanballat is a local governor. He's someone whose power is threatened by Nehemiah's presence and by the astounding organization of people power. And I think in a lot of ways, he's just a typical ruler. He's someone who's mostly interested in maintaining his own political power. And he says what the powerful often say in response to crisis. He says something like this: what you lowly people are trying to do is useless. You think that by your hands alone, you can rebuild that wall? And yet, while the powerful military leader ridicules the Jews, he inadvertently asks the most profound question in the entire passage. Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble? Meant to be a jab at the weakness of the people in the face of military power, what Nehemiah does is he turns Sanballat's question against itself. He asks God to turn their insults back on their own heads. Because Nehemiah knows something. Nehemiah knows that God is a God of restoration, a God of flourishing, a God who longs for the world to be returned to peace. And Nehemiah has faith that perhaps these stones indeed can be brought back to life. These stories of Nehemiah and of the church forests of Ethiopia leave us with a very important question. Will our religious institutions, will our congregations choose to work in solidarity with those standing in the rubble of climate disaster? Or will we continue to revel in our own privilege, insulating ourselves from the suffering of other creatures? Will we choose to be Nehemiah's neighbors, or will we choose to be Sanballat's soldiers? Will our fight be alongside those most affected by the climate crisis, or will we fight to maintain our own comfort and our own power? And perhaps most importantly, will we ask the question, can these stones be brought back to life in ridicule or in courage and vision? I hope you all are here today because you believe these stones can be brought back to life. And I know that for many of you, the image of your church or your home in rubble is not just a hypothetical, but a reality created by the climate crisis. Friends, I'm here to remind you that ministering in the climate crisis means building from the rubble. It means organizing our communities to create physical, communal, even spiritual structures that can withstand the storms of the climate crisis and that can create flourishing in the midst of destruction. Rebuilding in the face of crisis became the mission of the people of Jerusalem. It became the mission of the Ethiopian Orthodox priests. And what resulted was a flourishing people and a flourishing community of creation. Will it become the mission of our congregations? In courage and in vision, we pose the question to God, can we bring these stones back to life from the heaps of rubble? May we continually pray this question, and may we bravely work as if the answer is yes. And by the grace of God and by the work of our hands, something beautiful might arise from the rubble. Thanks be to God.
Amen. Thank you, Avery, for those words and this reflection of what it means to build resilience, to have walls of resilience and not of hate, or walls that are rooted in oppression, but instead that are rooted in kindness and community for each other. So now I'm going to turn over to show a presentation that is just on on how to build climate resilience for your congregation. And so we have some actions that you can take, whether it be as an individual, a congregation, or community. And this is a preview of our annual campaign that will be released within the next couple of weeks. And so, sorry, bear with me as I start the show. Okay, thank you. So we are so excited to be able to be with you all today. And we just wanted to go through, just so you all know, on each slide, there is a QR code that I have to share with you all. And this is just to make it, for those of you that are on your laptops, it's going to make it easier for you to just put your phone camera over that QR code, and then the resource will be downloaded onto your phone, or a window will open up. However, I'll also drop the links that we have after I'm done speaking into the chat function, so you all can access it that way as well. So some of the personal actions that we're advocating for, especially in this year, as we have a theme this year that's related to climate resilience, or faithful resilience, should I say, is to partner with a local organization to install natural climate adaptation solutions. This can be different for every community, especially in the US. We all have different regional impacts, unfortunately, that are due to climate change. And so it's really important to be tuned into what is happening in the local area in order to know how can you adapt and really use natural, more sustainable ways to be able to help yourself and your community to withstand the natural disasters that unfortunately are becoming more frequently. Another action that we always encourage people to do is to actually learn about the original peoples of your community. It's very clear that from our opening that is something that you are all already tuned into, but it's so important, if you haven't, to be able to know who are the indigenous tribes and people within your country find federal and state recognized tribes. I would also say find those tribes that are not recognized as well. There's so many tribes that unfortunately do not have legal status as tribes. And so learn who they are and also learn about their views on land and the customs that they had that are so important towards sustainability as we continue to move towards a more flourishing community in the wake of the climate crisis. And the third personal action that I would suggest in this moment is to develop a personal climate disaster resilience plan. You can use that QR code that I mentioned to be able to find a guide that will actually help you to be able to develop a plan that you can have, especially for your house, to be able to really make sure that when disaster hits, because unfortunately nowadays it's not a matter of if, but when, that you're ready, or that if you're not within the path of whatever natural disasters that could happen, that you're then at least prepared and then you can be of assistance to others. For congregation actions, we have a few suggestions as well. We encourage collective action and a sense of community by praying together, adopting a spirit of reference to creation and to one another, creating awareness about environmental migrants, sharing knowledge with other local churches or other places of worship, and organizations that foster dialogue and make space to hearing community concerns. It's so important now more than ever that we move towards community, as opposed to many of the times our culture seems to be moving towards more individualistic actions, but it's really now the time for communities such as yourselves to just be together and to really just to share knowledge, to grow together, to build resilience plans together for not just your churches, but also for the different places of worship that can come together to really be able to build this work. The second action that can be taken is to develop a resilience and disaster preparedness plan for your actual church or for your place of worship. And then invite congregants to develop a resilience and disaster preparedness plan for their households. And so really making sure that we're not only taking care of ourselves collectively, but individually to make sure that we are prepared if anything were to happen. Again, the QR code that's here is will lead you to some links that will actually give you resources on how to do said planning. And then the last congregation action that we are lifting up this year is to make room for people who might be displaced for disasters. As we see, there's so many things that could happen, whether it be people coming from other countries, but even just, unfortunately, there's also people who are being displaced within the US. And so really making sure that we're creating space so that if there's ever a time that someone needs help, that they can come to our churches, to our mosques, synagogues, or whatever places of worship that you have. And so, but also make sure that as you're making that prepared plan, that there's things that are put into the places, such as having cots for people to sleep on, having clean sheets, making sure that there's toiletries, including menstrual products, which are often forgotten about during these times of displacement, making sure that there is non-perishable food. Also consider installing showers, building some of the infrastructure within our buildings in order to make sure that it's sustainable for people to stay for potentially a short or long term based upon when the emergency will happen. And also connect with local emergency management organizations to make sure that we are connected to them, that the communities that we're in are able to actually talk to them and to be able to have a plan, and also for them to know that our communities are also resources if something were to happen. So policy action is always something that we are advocating for at Creation Justice Ministries. As much as we advocate for people to do direct actions, we also are advocates for making sure that not only are communities prepared, but also that there's systems in place so that we can have resilience and be able to have the resources needed, and be able to advocate so that those who are most vulnerable to the climate crisis are also being protected as well when it comes to resources and just getting assistance from the federal government. And so one of the things that you can do for policy actions is to visit our website and sign up for our listserv to be a part of our online community. We constantly have new things that we're asking people to participate in. And so we won't flood you with too many messages, but this is a great way to get plugged in on initial steps, especially simple steps in order to really just take your resilience plans to the next level and to actually advocate for system changes and law changes in order to make sure that we are preparing for these crises when they happen. And so if you sign up, we can give you monthly actions, sometimes more frequently, but at least monthly actions that will then really just give you the opportunity to be able to speak with your members of Congress. So here's a resource that we have that we want to make available to you all. Again, the QR code will point you to that resource. And it's a Faithful Resilience document that Avery actually created. And it's really asking the question of how can faith communities be hubs of resilience, helping their communities weather the physical, social, and spiritual storms of the climate crisis. This is a great guide that we're constantly using and pushing out as we continue to do this work, especially with climate change resilience being the theme for our campaign this year. And so this is something that we highly suggest would be good and really just a nice first step as a guide to really help you in your communities to think about how to create these plans. The next thing that we have, again, in alignment with resilience planning is we actually have some films that were created. They're very short, but there's 2 films that you can actually watch either as individuals, or we also have a toolkit if you want to do a screening and also to have reflection questions to then watch the video and have questions for you as a community to talk about when it comes to these videos and just thinking about your own community. And it's really a good conversation starter, especially to get people who are maybe not already in this space to really start thinking about how to do this work and really to think about the importance of why we need to be doing resilience building as communities. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the next slide. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to share is a group that we have that's being launched publicly is the Next 100 Ocean Equity Collective. I imagine you're probably not thinking too much about the ocean with where you're all located, but just wanted to share that this is a community that is led by BIPOC leaders and organizations that are working at the intersection of racial equity and ocean conservation issues, especially highlighting the needs of so many BIPOC communities and what their needs are in this time. And so this is a group that, you know, will do work around resilience, especially for those Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other communities that are really along the ocean, and really making sure that we look at our ecosystems and resilience, not just as but for all creation, including the communities that are rooted there. And so the QR code actually sends you to our public launch that is happening soon. So if you're interested in registering, that will take you to the Zoom registration for that event. However, that is what we're doing, and so excited and happy to answer any questions that you may have about that. And so we're happy to go and answer some questions during our remaining time. If you want to stay in contact with us, this is our emails as well as our social media accounts if you want to follow us. And so thank you so much for just having us and to hear about the resources that we have. We're happy to share more. And like I said, I will put the resources also in the chat function so that you all can access it that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avery and Karen. That was just absolutely wonderful. If you have questions, would you please drop them in the chat and I will pass them on. But as I'm waiting for questions to show up, I'm going to go ahead and start with my own questions. And this is for both of you. Many of the people on this call are organizers, and you have been at your organizing efforts for several years, particularly focused in, I think, the Southeast. And I'm just wondering if you have tips or suggestions for how best to connect across different faith traditions, how important it is to be theologically grounded. What sort of common themes are there that bring people together in this work?
Yeah, I can start out here and then pass it on to Karen. I think in terms of connecting across faith traditions, a framework that I love and have found to be really helpful is roots down, walls down. Of course, that is interesting after my sermon about walls, but the sense there is that, yeah, we can be rooted in our own theology and in our own beliefs, and we can have walls down and engage in organizing and conversation and dialogue and, you know, deep relationship with different traditions. And in fact, I think we are better when we do that, both our organizing and better as people of faith. So I think just as kind of a general framework, I've come to really love that. The second piece is that what I've found talking about resilience is that it cuts across theological and political ideology in a way that just basic climate organizing and environmental organizing does not. And that's because climate disasters don't really care what your ideology is. And so people are experiencing the effects of climate change, and whether or not they recognize that it is created by humans, they are looking for relief, and they are looking for people who will support them to build resilience in the face of that. So as much as you as organizers can build in climate resilience as part of your work, then I think you'll find you're reaching new audiences, you're reaching new people, and you're providing resources that have been sorely needed for a while. Karen, anything you'd add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, because Avery said it so well, but the only thing I would add is that this is probably coming from my Black church tradition, but I also think it's important to be grounded in theology, because this work, being honest, can be very depressing. And so if you're not careful, it's important to have it rooted in theology, because there's a sense of hope that I think is good for our mental health as we go through this. And so being able to really connect with each other, but also knowing that at the end of the day, for many of our faiths, so many of the principles that we have ring true, even if we're not necessarily looking at the same scripture. And so it's always a place where we can all find hope and solace and community within those. And so I think that's also an important reason why it's important for this work to be rooted in our theology, and often the catalysts when we're kind of in our down moments, the catalyst to keep moving and to keep finding hope in what can come.
Thank you. Yeah, that actually leads me to a follow-up question from the Revised Common Lectionary. I'm in the Christian tradition and the Episcopal Church, and we follow the Common Lectionary, and the readings of the last 2 Sundays have been from Corinthians, from Paul's letter that talks about faith, hope, and love enduring. And I'm wondering about that practice of hope and the practice of faith and the practice of love in the context of climate resilience.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you all that I struggle with hope. And I think many of us here maybe do, because we look around and it is very hard to grab on to the possibility of hope in the midst of so much devastation. I think what has helped me in seeing, I'm just going to narrow in on the hope piece of this, Peter, is seeing hope as a tentative possibility. That the theologian Joseph Pieper has a really good reflection on hope, where he writes that hope is neither presumption nor despair, that it's neither presuming that everything is going to be all right, and that despite anything that we do, the world is going to be, restored to its, beautiful, perfect place. And also, it's not despair, that both presumption and despair are forms of hopelessness, that despair, this this outlook that sometimes I can see in organizing and climate organizing, really, that no matter what we do, it doesn't matter because the world is already destroyed. That hope charts a third way, between those two spaces, and that it's okay to feel those at times. I think it's okay to feel hopeless at times, but practicing hope as really as a practice has been helpful for me.
Yeah, I think when it comes to hope and love and all these things, I think it has to be rooted in it, because at the end of the day, I think the climate crisis really calls us towards community. And in order for us to be able to withstand what is, and unfortunately, if we don't do anything, what is to come, then we have to be able to be rooted in loving for one another, looking out for one another. And so to me, when we think about these things, a lot of our response has to be rooted in caring for each other, because frankly, a lot of the things that got us here was not because we were in community with each other, because we were looking out for each other. And so unfortunately, is when we got further and further away from that is what created this problem. And so I think part of the solution is that we have to go back to that sense of community when it comes to the work that we do, because so much of the majority of the world is, based in a sense of community or tribe or whatever the case may be. And I think a big part of what we have to get to is that even if we're not a part of that, we have to find those communities to be a part of and to be committed to, and also understanding that even if we're not, we are our brother or sister's keepers, even if they're not in, within our community.
Well, thanks again so much. And we are at time, and I know we're going to lose Avery because he's got to go to another thing. So thank you so much. And I just want to say, as we transition and as I turn it back over to Charisse, that we have really enjoyed our relationship with Creation Justice Ministries and have worked together on advocacy related to the Cascades-Siskiyou National Monument. And that is one of the places in Oregon and Northern California that is very special to me personally. And every time I'm there, I think about our relationship with Creation Justice Ministries and the work that they have done to help preserve and expand that monument. So again, thanks to Avery and Karen, and I'll turn it back over to Charisse.
Thank you, Peter, for that, and to Avery and Karen for being with us today. We appreciate the kind of big picture look at climate resilience and faith communities' role in that, and the many resources you shared. So at this time, we're going to take a break until 2:10. So please get up and stretch and maybe get a couple of breaths of fresh air, have a bio break, get a little snack, and come back here at 2:10. You can leave your Zoom screen going and just turn off your camera if you'd like, or stick around and chat with friends in the chat, and we'll see you in a few minutes at 2:10. So I hope you had a nice break there, and we'll go ahead and regather. And now we're going to be hearing from a panel of folks who are from our region working on climate resilience and disaster preparedness. And so that last session was kind of a broad overview, a national organization sharing with us some resources. Now we're kind of bringing it home to the Northwest and faith communities that are working on these issues in our state. And so I wanted to note as we head into this part of the summit that we've so far experienced as a planet about 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming. And at the current rate, we'll see increases of at least 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, according to the 2021 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. And with just 3 degrees of warming, it's estimated that places that previously had about 2 months of drought will have an estimated 10 months of drought in a 3-degree warmer world, 2 degrees warmer than now. And extreme weather events that happened a few times a century will happen almost 4 out of every 5 years. And we're already feeling these impacts here in Oregon. This impacts our ability to grow food. It impacts immigration and causes climate refugees, to have to move. It creates vast areas that will not be inhabitable by human beings and other species. It increases the chances of massive wildfires and larger floods and storms. And this can feel overwhelming when we're thinking about what to do about this on our own. When the fires hit in 2020, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon helped put together a list of faith communities willing to host those displaced by fires. But we were wondering, what might we be able to do if we planned ahead of time to prepare for situations like this? What might we be able to do to help legislate a more just and sustainable future? And what might we be able to do to organize together as faith communities to be ready to help make our broader communities more resilient in good times and in hard times? So therefore, we hope our summit today can be a step in that direction toward working together on climate resilience and community flourishing. And so we've organized this panel of leaders here in Oregon who are working on disaster preparedness and emergency response. And considering how their efforts need to be reimagined and amplified as we head into the climate crisis further. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Michael Ellick, who is the Director of Public Engagement at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, to moderate this panel discussion and to introduce the panelists and to have them share about regional and denominational approaches to climate resilience. So Michael.
Great, thanks, Charisse. I appreciate the introduction. And we have 4 leaders who are going to be in this initial panel before our breakouts together. I'm going to let them introduce and give some contextual framework for their organizations themselves. It's going to be Reverend David Brower-Riki, Luis Kinzel, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Alan Euler, and Kim Vogel. And I'm going to share, have them introduce each of you, your organization and denomination that you work with, and what role that you have inside that group. Just a little 1 to 2 minute introduction. And Reverend Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you first.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Charisse, for the invitation to be here today. It's great. Yes, I work with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, specifically Lutheran Disaster Response US, which is a ministry of our church. And more specifically than that, I work here in the Pacific Northwest. So my region and territory would be Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Essentially FEMA Region 10, for those of you familiar with disaster response efforts. But I live in Portland, Oregon, and I've lived here for 40 years in Oregon, not Portland, in Oregon for 40 years. So I love you all best. It's just the way it is. I started my work just 2 years ago in March of 2020. The imagination of the position was that we've got 2 things coming to us in the Pacific Northwest we need to prepare for. One is the Cascadia subduction zone event of unknown time. And the other was this thing that we thought was coming down the road, climate change disasters. Immediately, within 1 week of starting, COVID settled in on us and changed the whole landscape. A month before I started, the Umatilla River had one of those 100-year flood events, although it hadn't been 100 years since it happened before. I remember specifically seen in the paper statement of the East Oregonian, somebody in Pendleton saying, you know, we're going to beat this and put it back the way it was. And I thought, no, don't put it back the way it was. That's not good enough. You know, build it back better. So my work is with congregations, Lutheran agencies, but there's nothing Lutheran about disaster. So any way we can build resiliency, and I also deal with response. And the point I wanted to make, and then I'm done, is that having been hit by COVID, having been hit by the Umatilla floods, having been hit by the 2020 wildfires, resilience just falls off the table when you go into emergency disaster mode, response mode. So we can talk about that. Thank you.
That's great. And David, thanks so much. Lutheranism, or disasters are not Lutheran specific, is a great tagline t-shirt for you, by the way. And I'm going to get that for you later on. Luis, could you share a little bit about where you're coming from and the context of your work today?
Yeah, so my name is Louise Kinzel.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay, it's okay. And I am involved with the Oregon-Idaho Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I've been the volunteer in mission coordinator for 4 years, and just in the last couple of weeks stepped into the interim position as our conference disaster response coordinator. So, but I will say that I live in Hermiston, and I have been involved in the Umatilla flood since almost the beginning. So I was there for the mark, and then have sat on the executive board and the volunteer committee. So I've been in long-term recovery for a while. So that's where I'm coming from.
Excellent. And blurring the lines between disaster preparedness and just good old-fashioned community resilience. Alan Euler, could you share a little about your role and the work of the LDS Church in this context? Oh, my friend, you're muted, I think. Yes.
Didn't have much more to say. Thank you. My name is Alan Euler, and appreciate the opportunity of being here. Reverend and Charisse, thank you for the invitation. My role is the communication director for the Portland area for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm involved in dealing with disaster and emergency preparedness, not only as in my role, but also in previous roles that I've had in the church. And the church is really focused, and has been for many decades, on the issue of emergency preparedness. And they focus on individual preparedness, self-reliance, and individual preparedness. They focus on community, congregational preparedness, in terms of what do we need to do in terms of making sure our members are prepared for and are able to address emergencies. And then how do we reach out to the community in terms of making sure that the community needs are addressed. And the church has, over the years, developed a very sophisticated welfare process and system that addresses not only the individual needs for food, but also for food for individuals in the community, and staging for disasters. When hurricanes hit in the Southeast, for example, we will stage truckloads of supplies and goods outside the zone, ready to move in when it's there. I would say that in terms of our congregations, we kind of go by the direction given by our founding prophet, Joseph Smith. He said, we teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves. And so our concept of teaching are things like that the earth and all things on it should be used responsibly to sustain human family. However, all are stewards and not owners over this earth and its bounty, and we will be accountable to God for all that we do with what he's entrusted into us. So we focus on the fact that we are responsible for God's earth, and we will be held accountable in terms of addressing that. So that's kind of our focus.
That's great.
Go from there.
That's great. When we come back around, I'd love you to share a little bit more nuance and detail of how that plays out, because I think it's a fascinating story. But I want Kim Vogel to introduce herself as well, and then we're going to go around again and get into the weeds a little bit. Kim.
Thank you. My name is Kim Vogel. I live in Hood River, Oregon. I am a member of the United Church of Christ, UCC. And the way our structure is set up, our congregational churches are independent, and we are also kind of self-governed. So, but we form ourselves into conferences. So I am connected to the Central Pacific Conference, which is Southwestern Washington, all of Oregon, and a squidge of Western Idaho. There's about 35 conferences in the United States and our territories, and we then kind of all glop together for at a national level. Our national level, we have a minister of disaster response that works through an organization called Global Hope. And that is our kind of most upper high resource. But each conference has a position called a conference disaster coordinator, and that is my title. Some of them are paid. Those coordinators that are in the more high frequency disaster areas where flooding and hurricane and all of that stuff seems to happen on a pretty regular basis are often full-time paid folks. And the rest of us who deal with it on a less frequent basis are more voluntary, which I am a volunteer. We had a disaster ministry team in this conference for years. It kind of fell off the wayside when there wasn't anything big happening. And 2 years ago, with the huge wildfires at the end of 2020, our church needed to respond. And so we resurrected out of the ashes like a phoenix. I became the conference district coordinator, and we've been rolling ever since. So we provide support to all our congregations and our communities. And I'll touch a little bit about how much we've worked down in Southern Oregon on that.
Great. Well, thanks to each of you. We appreciate the scope of your work and the time you've put into this and sharing with us. Each of you have kind of started to get into this a little bit, but just to give people listening who don't have all the acronyms and aren't as versed, I'm thinking about how each of the scope of your work play out on the ground for faith communities that are building walls around forests, maybe, which is what I'm now going to go do. I'll never forget that. But just to go back another round, and this time, what is the main scope of your organization? And we're going to talk later on about what is it lacking, what could it do more, where are the gaps? But ostensibly, what are each of your denominations doing as far as climate disaster preparedness for the local parish, emergency response, but also community resilience, because that's more and more relevant. And Dave, we'll go in a circle for a second, then later on we'll hopefully cross-pollinate, but just to give people a scope of how are you staffing in these ways congregations on the ground in these regions?
That is such a great question. And especially the part about the movement from response to resiliency ministries. And it is so apparent, I think, to everybody in the disaster world today that we are not going to respond our way out of this one. And that if we can't shift and learn to build community resiliency, so as Alan says, people are owning their stewardship, they're owning their responsibility to the earth, they're owning their need to be there for their neighbor, it ain't going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So that's just an overall sense. In the Lutheran Church ELCA, we participate in climate ministries in a lot of ways. The connection with disaster response is one of them. We have advocacy programs nationally. Lutherans Restoring Creation are a group trying to build, just much like EMO, trying to build congregational resiliency on the ground. Eco-Faith Recovery, which I think many of you know here in EMO, started out with Robin, who's a Lutheran pastor, but we just sort of give those things away. Robin hasn't just given it away, she stayed with it, but I don't know that they would claim to be a Lutheran organization necessarily anymore, but hopefully proud of their roots. But that doesn't matter to us, because as we say, it's all of us, right? It's a human ministry, a human response. We participated at COP26 and have before, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, it's all about partnership. It's just all about partnership. And so, Alan and I cross paths. Kim and I cross paths. Louise, it's great to meet you. I'm not sure we have as much, but UMCOR is just huge in the disaster response world in this part of the country. We're thankful for that, as well as non-church groups. So we work through the VOADs, voluntary organizations addressing disaster. Each state has one, and that brings all of us to the table, along with Red Cross, United Way, et cetera, et cetera. That part I know and it's easy. Your question is, how does climate fit into that? And I would say, and then I'll pass the baton here, but I would say that our efforts locally through the disaster lens are to try to do education and awakening. it's so hard to say. It's not hard to say, it's hard to be heard. Do you understand that the Labor Day fires were not a one-off? Do you understand it is part of a pattern? Do you understand the flood in Umatilla was not a one-off? Do you understand that the atmospheric river floods in the Pacific Northwest were, in Northwest Washington, were not a one-off? And we're starting to wake up. So unlike parts of the country like Hurricane Alley, where they know these rhythms, we don't know them out here. The benefit of that is it wakes people up and you've got an avenue to start talking, and climate change has to be part of that conversation. Sorry.
Great. No, Dave, that's great. Thank you. I'm my mind's racing ahead to future questions that Charisse has thought up, and so I'm thinking ahead. But Louise, same basic frame. Like, what is the UMC doing as far as disaster preparedness, emergency response, and community resilience?
So, I'm going to focus on three things. And this is in that model of what are the phases of disaster. So in readiness, okay, so that's preparedness, obviously. We have an UMCOR program called Connecting Neighbors. And UMCOR, again, is the United Methodist Committee on Relief. And that's kind of our overarching organization that we do all our training with, and we get grants from, and people can donate to as well. So this program, Connecting Neighbors, focuses on three things. And the first section of the program is to focus on individuals and families. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't help other people. So this is focused on getting families ready. Do they have an evacuation plan? Do they have supplies for at least 2 weeks? A go bag even in their car. And what about their documents? Where are they? Where are they stored? Can they get them quickly? And then the second part is your church ready? And how do you get your church ready? So now that individuals are ready, then does the church have a disaster preparedness and response plan? That was already mentioned. Do you have that plan? I bet some of us don't. I bet a lot of us don't. Who has the authority to act? Who is in charge of the facility? What's your communication plan? And then we go into the third segment of this program, and that's how do you engage with your community? Once you are okay and your congregation is okay, then how do you open up your church or go out into the community and serve? And so there's things like providing shelter, providing food, daycare. Can your facility serve as an incident management center or a reunification center? So those are all the things that are talked about in this long 3-section program. So UMCOR develops training, empowers local churches to be leaders in preparing their congregants, preparing the church, and then serving around in their community and beyond. The second part of that model is relief. And that's where our ERT teams, early response teams, come in. And so these are people that are trained, specially trained and equipped to respond quickly to local disasters and provide more immediate disaster relief assistance. So they might be there to tarp a roof. They might be there to muck out a house. They might be there to make an assessment once they can get into the building. They might be there to haul debris. So they've been again trained, and they have to be badged in order to be sent out, and they're sent out generally in teams. And the third one is working in recovery. And that's where United Methodist Volunteer Missions comes in. And these are just ordinary people like me, ordinary people. And you don't have to be a certain age. You can be a high school child, or you could be 80 years old. And you don't have to have special skills either, because you can learn on the job. So you're there to do what's needed to show care and help as needed. And so the hope is that we're restoring normalcy. We're giving hope as we go through all of these. So I guess those are the things I would lift up that we do.
Great, Louise, thank you so much. I appreciate this. There's a lot here, and I want to switch over to Alan, though, has a very unique, to me, my mind, story of community resilience in the LDS Church, and maybe you could share a little bit. Oh, and you're muted. I do it every time.
Nice. There we go. I'm just going to stay off mute.
Sure.
Anyway, so again, we focus first, as we said, on the individual and making sure that they're prepared. And that preparedness comes on a regular basis. Each month, for example, our members fast 2 meals, and they take the money that they would have spent on those meals and they contribute it to the bishop, to the congregation leader, and that begins to build the money that's needed to help individuals who have individual crises, and that may not seem like a lot in terms of how it's related to a disaster, but the reality is that at those point in times when homes are destroyed or things are taken care of, it's those funds that begin to address those issues. In addition to that, the church has a significant welfare process where we have a fair number of farmlands where we produce food, potatoes and beans and rice and peanuts for peanut butter and you name it, and that is all produced, and as you envision a beehive, all of those individual products are brought to a central warehouse in Salt Lake City. And that then forms the ability to distribute in times of need what is taken care of. And so our structure is, in terms of climate justice and having organizations that focus on that, the church doesn't have that. But again, we teach the principles of you are a steward, and then we expect members to go out and become members of organizations, various climate organizations, or whatever they feel called to do in order to be able to address issues as it relates to climate change. But we are prepared as an individual congregation, first as an individual, then a congregation, and then as a church in whole, to be able to respond to disasters that take place wherever they happen to be. I don't know if that's where you're getting to.
That's great. No, that's true. I mean, I wanted to give people a sense of that, and I'll just say personally, Alan knows this, but I was really moved by my tours through the Bishop's Storehouse and the idea that so much of that resilience was growing out of the collective fasting. Like, to me, that's just such a profound example of something that could get leveraged. I mean, there's a lot of examples that we could imagine filling into that kind of blank, but thank you, Alan. That's great. I want to make sure I give time to Kim to answer the same thing, like what's happening inside these networks right now, and yeah, what's the scope of that work with emergency response, but also building community resilience?
It's so much fun to go last, because I just say, yeah, all of that, that and that, and one of those, and it's like,
give me some of this on the side.
So first of all, I want to go live here and just say to Alan, as we were getting resurrected a couple of years ago, one of the things we did was take a cue from the Latter-day Saints emergency preparedness workbook. You have some amazing pieces in there, and especially your inclusivity. And we just released our brand new 2022 manual. I know I've seen the Methodist one, I've seen the Lutheran one. A lot of the denominations have these preparedness manuals encouraging how their churches can, be better ready. And we just redid ours to include a lot of inclusive language so that you're thinking about people who have mobility needs or visual needs. So just to kind of drill it down, every congregation is different. The needs in a metropolitan area are completely different than out here in little Yokel, Hood River, Oregon, where we're much more rural and most of us have camping equipment. So when my power goes out, I just go spring over to the RV and I'm okay. You don't do that in downtown 162nd in Portland. So knowing your community and knowing your neighborhood and knowing the potentials of what can happen there and the impacts of climate are huge. And being prepared for those kinds of specifics. I don't have a tsunami in my neighborhood. I've got a volcano, that kind of stuff. So being prepared on that individual level, being prepared on that congregational level, and being able to be prepared in your community, we all do that, but it's got to be really drilled down and specific. And our church has a history of working on social justice issues. So we're looking to see who is at most risk and who is at most need in our communities. And that again also looks different. It looks much different in Hermiston, where we have the tribes, as it does here in Hood River, where we have a large contingency of Latinx workers and non-English speakers. Some communities have more elderly, where that whole idea of getting a emergency text message on this thing is just an impossibility. So how do you communicate with the folks in your congregation who don't get that alert saying that, you know, the tsunami's coming? They need the news from the neighbor next door, and setting up those kinds of contingency plans. So our churches are focusing on their neighborhoods, on their needs, and trying to do that. And our bigger church is helping prepare that. We also do some other things, and I just want to touch base on this. I know the other folks do this, they're just not putting them out there. We have a large system for grant monies. And for instance, real quick, when we had our fires, the wildfires, we immediately put out $5,000 grants to several churches in our congregation so that they could look to see what they needed right then and there in their immediate area. Then we have larger grants that you can come back for that sustainability and for those long-term recovery groups. We also have volunteer teams that come to the ground. The UCC is more of a long-term recovery group. Sometimes you'll see the term LTRG. We don't come in right away. That's what the Red Cross and FEMA and all of those great UMCOR are all really based at. But we come in after those folks start to move on, and we stay for the long haul. Again, kind of what Louise is doing, where you're mucking out houses and you're hanging in there and trying to get that. Those recovery things don't happen overnight. Like I think the other groups, we provide a huge contingency of emotional and spiritual care. Our pastors, our lay people go out, people are hurting, and they sometimes need that care and support. And so do our clergy. We actually offer retreats for clergy. Once you've given it all to everybody, you still need to be recharged. And I'm sure Dave can appreciate that as an ordained clergy member, and having to say, my tank is empty, where do I get that refilled? And then we also do the congregational preparedness. So those are some of the other areas that we also engage in, along with everything that the other three of my friends here has brought up.
That's great. Kim, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. I as you're all talking, I'm particularly interested in the ways in which the boundaries blur. Not just in the ways in which we have the potential to be of service beyond our community members of our faith communities, but to our wider communities as well, and the ways in which communities of faith that normally don't work together on XYZ, believe me, I've tried to make them, the ways in which this becomes a natural thing within a certain context. So my question is, are there ways for each of you in the work that you're doing that your group helps your region, your wider region, be more community resilient, not just for your people? And you know, there might be subtle or blatant ways in which that's happened or which you intend for that to happen. But are there concrete examples? I mean, the last couple of years has given Oregon more than its fair share of emergencies. So if you have an example of how that's played out for people to conceptualize, Kim, I see you chomping at the bit.
I am.
You
So
go
proud
for
of
it,
us.
please. Yeah, no, jump. You shouldn't
Okay.
be last every time. So go in reverse
I
order.
know. Anybody who is anybody in Oregon knows about the fires that went through Phoenix and Talent down in Southern Oregon, just wiped out. The Phoenix School District, 50% of their students lost their homes. It was horrific. And we have congregations in Medford and in Ashland. They immediately jumped up. We sent money down there so that they could take care of any congregational members who may have been involved in that. We had a few, and also to provide immediate help to anybody else that was there. As the teams came in and declared disaster areas and started working on trying to find people homes and trying to clean up the rubble and build a wall, we got involved with the City of Talent. We had done a collection for wildfire relief throughout all of our churches in our conference. We got involved with the City of Talent and a number of other groups, faith-based and otherwise, and started working on temporary housing in the middle of an abandoned parking lot in downtown Talent. It was a lot that was designated for urban renewal, but it is now going to be a 175 space RV park with trailers that have been donated and purchased through grant monies for the families who don't qualify for FEMA help. You get FEMA if you're a homeowner, you get FEMA if you're legal, you get FEMA for a lot of reasons. And if you don't fit in all of those boxes, you are left out and you have no recourse. Yeah. The park opened up for the school year this year. Our money, specifically from our UCC grant, paid for the electrical hookup and the first 3 months of electrical service for each person moving in. That's how we've contributed.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for that. That's a really beautiful and powerful image. Anyone else want to share? Dave, yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll jump in. My experience has been that most of our churches have something they do well. Maybe it's feeding, maybe it's housing, maybe it's organizing. I would want to give a shout out here around the Labor Day wildfires to the folks who were not necessarily church-based directly, but who did the feeding programs for people recovering from the fire. This was an amazing collection of restaurant owners who organized themselves in the midst of COVID when they couldn't do their regular jobs to feed Oregonians who were survivors. They organized, they coordinated, they took foods, they did culturally specific foods for families in the needs. They did holiday foods for people in their specific religious traditions. It was to me, a prime example of how people in a resilient system can find each other and organize in the context of their needs. And churches, of course, were helping to coordinate and oil that machine, but Lutherans didn't do that. Lutherans talked with them and worked with them, but it wasn't us who was feeding people. It was Oregonians from restaurants who were feeding each other. And that's it's just amazing and wonderful to watch that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll pass up, but I just want to say, working with communities in different parts of the state, those churches are the connective tissue for the community in much bigger ways than I experienced that, say, in Portland or in Eugene. And so I just want to highlight like the ways in which the churches may not just do the work, but might be the town square for a community. I'm sorry, Louise, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Actually, I'd like to share two things. One is UMCOR usually gives a solidarity grant to any disaster. It's $10,000, use it as you need it. And so that's usually where we start. But for the Umatilla flood, we also got a recovery grant, which is $100,000, which we are still working on getting finished. We're almost to the end of the Umatilla, and which is amazing because it's only been two years. And so anyway, it was supposed to be about 8. So that's one thing that we can do. But for local people, the way to get them involved, we're starting to set up some storage centers throughout our conference. And again, our conference is Oregon and the bottom part of Idaho. So there's a lot of distance there. So we're setting up storage centers that will store disaster kits, and those are hygiene kits, cleaning buckets they're good for cleaning for floods or fire. Soot sponges are added to those cleaning buckets for fires. We have sifters, we have school kits. And so one short story that I just want to share, it's not quite as big as what Kim shared, but we responded. We had a request during the bootleg fire in Klamath from a Native American ministry in Chiloquin, and they needed, not only did they need cleaning kits, but they also needed hygiene kits. And I just had a church in the Portland area. They just had a big assembly line process and put together 200 hygiene kits. So we tried to figure out, okay, now how are we going to get them to Chiloquin, which is where they were set up. And we have a retired pastor who has begun volunteering with a group called Operation Airdrop. He has his own private plane. It's a small private plane, but so he wanted to fly them down. Too much smoke, right? He couldn't do it safely. So he flew the hygiene kits to Albany, and another person who volunteers sometimes to take supplies where needed, picked them up, put them in his little trailer because he was going to take them with a motorcycle to Chiloquin. So that's how we delivered those hygiene kits.
Sure. I've got a bike. I could take down. You can put some on my. That's great. Yeah. That's great. Alan, yeah, go ahead.
I would, and I have my mic on now. I spoke with the individual, our presiding priesthood leader in the area, and we were talking about the fires in Southern Oregon, and his comment was, churches tend to be kind of offish towards each other, and he said that that kind of all melted along with the fire when we began to realize that we needed to help each other irrespective of our denominational differences. And he says they received a ton of donations from members of our church, and we didn't have a place to store them. So they were talking, and there's a pastor of Living Waters Church down in Southern Oregon. They had a storage facility, and he says they offered us the place to store all of these things, and they had our missionaries brought all of these supplies over, and there was just a bond that developed as a result of this tragedy. There are walls that do come down that ought not to be. We had the wife of this priesthood leader went to the expo center where there was 1,500, 2,000 people initially housed as a result of that, and she asked, well, what is it that you need? And the response is, we need shoes. People had to leave in such a hurry that they didn't have anything on. There were no shoes. And so she went out and bought the shoes that were needed and brought them back. And when she brought them back, other people were saying, oh, we need shoes too. And she became known as the shoe lady, because she would feel that need of responding to that. There's just a sense of wanting to help, again, from irrespective of your denomination and congregation, that people were calling, asking, how much money do you need? And our priesthood leader ended up with just from our congregations over $100,000 that was given to the local area, and that's just the members. That's not organized in any real way. That's just the need for people, as Dave said, whether it's restaurants, cooking meals, or whatever. It is that need to share, and that came. One gentleman from Utah who lives in that area drove all the way from Salt Lake City to the area with a trailer full of donations that people wanted to give. And so I think that we have all of these organizations and structures, but it's the people just wanting to share and to give and to respond to that disaster, I think is a monument to the resilience of people. I said, so we're going to be talking about resilience. And he said, the key to resilience is hope. Hope that there are those around you that will respond and help you in your time of need. That is the reason for resilience, is that sense of hope.
Amen, Alan. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that is so well said. Michael, can I tweak it a little bit here?
Yeah.
When I started this work, I came into it because of my interest in climate change, quite frankly. And I find myself doing here what I do really well, quite frankly, is talk about disaster and response. And the question here is resilience, specifically around the question of climate change. And to me, that has to do with what can you do to either prevent climate change or mitigate climate change so that we don't have to do the disaster response that we're causing for ourselves. And that's a much different question. After my first year where I fell off of resilience into response because that was necessary, I told Lutheran Disaster Response, I'm not going to do this anymore unless you give me more money than another person. And that other person has to do two things. One is only do resilience, because we lose sight of that. And then number two, Sarah Kruger, who I'm so privileged to be working with here in this part of the country now, Sarah brought the lens of racial equity with her. So we work with the lens through Sarah of racial equity and through me with climate change while we're trying to do disaster work, right? But what we are all learning, right, is that you cannot face climate change without racial equity conversation as well. So thank you to EMO for doing that. And when we try to build resiliency, a huge piece of that, in my sense, is listening to those we have not listened to for a long time, for those who are vulnerable and marginalized, and in our part of the world, Native populations who actually know what the rhythms ought to look like, and we're doing that for a long time. So I'm expressing my frustration at my working job, not being able to keep focusing on the resilience question, because the world we've made for ourselves is getting worse and worse and worse. So we respond and we respond and we respond and we put it back the way it was. And then we have this same problem again, right? So that's, sorry for letting me vent, but I think the resiliency question has to do with connecting with other folks that are in my own church, for example, and those who understand the world, this particular part of the world, differently than I ever will.
Yeah, I mean, I have like 1,000 follow-ups and questions for each of you, and because we've been thinking about a lot of this in terms of our Reckoning Racism work, and we are past time, so I'm going to have to shift and hand it over to Cerise. But I want to thank you, each of you, for the work you're doing and for sharing it that you bring to us here. If there is inspiration to take in a post-industrial, post-Western society, post-apocalyptic world, it is the possibility of us working together and finding new ways of severing those strange blocks. And so I'm not trying to make that sound like the hope that comes out of this as if it's a silver lining, because these are gruesome realities we're talking about, but I do feel inspired to do that work and find ways for us to map together, to support each other. And but I'm going to leave it at thank you in the interests of the bigger agenda today, each of you. And we're just grateful that you would spend part of your Sunday afternoon away from family and with us to have this important conversation. Thank you so much, each of you. And with that, I want to hand it back to Charisse.
Thank you. I add my thanks to what you have just said, Michael, and thanks to all of you for being here and sharing with us. So we're going to spend some time in breakout rooms next and get a chance to go a little deeper. This was sort of a denominational level conversation. And so we've gone from national to denominational regional conversations. So now we're going to take it a little bit smaller to the level of local congregations, local faith communities responding and building resilient communities in their particular ways. So the ways that we're going to look at that are through 4 different breakouts. And so I think we'll have a slide here momentarily that will show you the different breakout rooms. So you should shortly have the ability to choose which breakout room that you want to join. There will be one room relating to solar panels. So thinking about the energy efficiency aspect, as well as the aspect of with battery backup, they can be a place for, space for having power if the grid goes down. For people's experiences with fire in room 2, with preparing for and responding to situations of fire, community resilience and food justice in the 3rd room, and then more continued conversation about this disaster preparedness and response in the 4th room. So we'll open those breakout rooms, and you can choose which room to go into. They will close at 3:35, and so just kind of be aware of the time. You'll have about 1 minute that'll tell you, okay, look out, your time is almost up, and then it will suck you back into this room for a little bit of wrap up conversation in this session before we take another break before our final segment of this summit. So let's open up the breakout rooms, and you can choose which one that you want to join at this point. If you have questions, please ask the folks with emo tech before their name, and they'll help you get sorted into a room. So I would love to hear in the chat if you have a couple of words to reflect on what you learned. What was the most powerful or interesting or inspiring thing that you learned in your breakout session? So feel free to share just a couple of words in the chat of what stood out to you from the breakout session that you were in. So thank you for participating in those, and I'd love to kind of get a reflection so that we can hear a little bit from each of the groups. So connecting with our neighbors is important. Reimagining what the role of the church is in the 21st century and beyond. And don't waste a good disaster. I think that one needs a little context, but it sounds like a good thing to learn. Get a go bag ready and to share that with your congregation, your faith community. Some specific ideas for getting your faith community started on preparedness. Learning you can find resources and don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, that's really important. You don't have to create something yourself. There's a lot of resources out there. Hope for the future of the church in a new manifestation. I love that. Getting to know your neighbors ahead of time. Taking action to prevent the disaster first. Yeah, we'll be talking about that a little bit in the next session as well. Needing to prepare for a disaster. Yeah, so not just like, oh, now the disaster's here, we respond to it, but it's a little easier if we've prepared in advance. Learning about not being personally prepared yet and needing to do that work. How to become proactive. Some people actually are preparing, so that's encouraging and inspiring. Yeah, thank you. All right, and people that have given funds as investment in preparedness is inspiring and a good idea. Yeah, thank you. So we heard in different sessions, we heard about solar power with backup batteries as a congregational way to prepare to make sure that congregations can host a space if the power grid goes down. And that also helps to kind of prevent the disaster, right? If we all move to renewable energy sources. We heard about responses and ability to prepare for fire disasters. And we heard about food justice and preparation for making sure that people have food in the event of a disaster, as well as kind of a more resilient food system for the everyday. And we heard about climate disaster preparedness and what we should do to prepare ourselves and our communities for climate disasters. And a lot of that was about building up community resilience before the disaster, so we get to know our neighbors and know who's going to need what, who's going to supply what if we do run into climate disasters. So these are all great things that we were able to learn about and hear stories about in these breakout sessions. I think hopefully all of these got recorded, and so you only got to go to one of them, but you will hopefully be able to listen back to the other ones later on, as I'll send out links to all of the recordings and as well as all of the manuals and other great resources that have been mentioned today. So you'll receive those after, in the next week or so after this summit. So we have talked about kind of the national level, the regional level, the individual congregational level of climate resilience and disaster preparedness and response. And we'll take a brief break and then we'll come back together to talk about climate justice advocacy. And this is a way to kind of help us to prevent some of the disasters, right? If we do advocacy now to shift things away from the climate crisis, hopefully we don't need to prepare quite as much, and we can prepare but not have to go through as much of a crisis as otherwise. So that's kind of where we're headed in the next session. So please take about 5 or 6 minutes of a break and meet us back here at 3:50, and we will talk about climate justice advocacy and the faith community's role in that. So see you in a few minutes.
Charisse, this is Dave. I apologize. I did not have recording privileges in my small group, so we didn't get that, and I couldn't find a way to get out and find them.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. Maybe we can chat and we can send out a brief summary of what you all covered.
Sure.
Nice to see you, Dave, and please say hi to Gretchen for me.
I'll do that, Deb. Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Good.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with our final session. So as people come back and regather, I'd invite you to remember the space of spiritual groundedness that we began this session with, and remind yourself to tap back into that deep wisdom from your own spiritual tradition and the connection between our traditions as we listen to the wisdom together and participate in the community of all life. So take a few moments to reconnect. So this last session really connects to the idea of advocacy. And maybe this is not something that you really connect to your spiritual tradition all the time, or maybe it's something that you do easily connect to your spiritual tradition. But I think that it's an important aspect of this conversation and something that as people of faith, we can do together to make a big difference. So we can each do individual actions to care for the planet, and those are really important. We can do actions as a congregation or a faith community. We can do actions in our own neighborhood and in our cities and towns. And we can do actions at the level of our state and national governments and try to influence policies that will care for our neighbors and make sure that we encourage just and sustainable solutions to the climate crisis. And so that is what we're going to be talking about in this session. And so while we are doing the work of preparing for the inevitable climate crises that we are already experiencing and will continue to experience because of the trajectory we're already on, we can also keep things from getting worse. And so I think that's what our public policy advocacy needs to be about as we think about climate justice and environmental justice that focuses on making sure that things are equitable for all different types of people and even for other species, for non-human forms of life and parts of our planetary community. So I encourage us to work together in the state of Oregon and at the national level to support policies that are doing really good work. And so that's what this rest of our time together is going to be like. And I'm first going to share some ways that you can get involved in our work with Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. And then we'll hear from our Public Policy Director, Britt Conroy, about the particular climate-related policy priorities that we're putting forward for this legislative session. And then we have the honor of getting to hear from Senator Deb Patterson, and she's going to share with us her wisdom from her unique position on a couple of committees at the state legislature, and as a former pastor to talk to us about the faith community's role in all of this. And finally, we'll close out this session with some reflection and with a blessing from Reverend Kano. So that's what we have ahead of us for the next little over half an hour. So first of all, I wanted to share with you some things that we are doing together with Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light, in case you have not heard of these things and want to hear about them. And so the first thing that we have that we're able to offer as a resource for all of us to work together toward better statewide policies is our Oregon Interfaith Power and Light advocacy team. So this is our second year having a climate justice focused advocacy team in Oregon. And through this, we are able to organize people of faith around the state to support policies that we think are important climate justice policies in Oregon, as well as we do some work at the federal level. And so we give you opportunities to contact your legislators and connect with your friends and neighbors who might also want to know about these things and encourage them to support these policies as well. We give you opportunities to meet with your legislators and try to make that as simple as possible for you to make your voice heard to the Oregon legislature and to our federal congresspeople and senators. So we encourage you to sign up, and that there will be a link in the chat for you to sign up for the Oregon Interfaith Power and Light advocacy team if you haven't already. I know a lot of you clicked the little button when you registered for this summit to join the advocacy team. So that will be, I'll be contacting you this week so that the legislative session is starting right up and getting you informed about our advocacy team efforts. So that is the first thing. We'll go to the next slide. And wanted to kind of look ahead at some of the work we're doing this spring. We have a opportunity through the National Interfaith Power and Light Network to do some film screenings of the film Youth v. Gov. And this is a documentary about youth plaintiffs who sued the federal government about climate justice, and basically saying that we're not making it possible for them to have a livable future where they can pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as they're supposed to be guaranteed. And so if you would like to host a film screening, this is going to be happening during Earth Week. And this is a really powerful way to get people energized about climate justice and to see these inspiring youth, several of whom are from Oregon, speaking up with passion and considering what might be our role in supporting these kinds of efforts. And we have an opportunity right now that is really exciting, where we have been, we have a group called Green Circles, and we've been organizing with Randy Woodley, who is a friend, and he's of Cherokee descent, and he's written a book called Becoming Rooted, and we have EMO and some of our partners, Ecofaith Recovery, and several other contributors have put together a Lenten devotional to go along with Dr. Woodley's book. And so we would encourage you to, if you're from a Christian congregation, to check out this Lenten devotional and encourage your congregation to read it during Lent. And so we'll put the links to order that in the chat. And if you're from a tradition other than Christian, there's also a Jewish economic Shemitah going on to connect with becoming rooted, and we're doing monthly organizing gatherings around this book, considering a more Indigenous worldview, how we become rooted in this place in Oregon and shift towards caring for creation, caring for this place that we get to live in ways that are honoring to the community of all life here. And so this Lenten devotional connects those themes from becoming rooted to the Christian tradition during the season of Lent. So you can check that out if you're interested in learning more and reading it yourself during Lent, or getting your congregation to read it as well. So those are some things that we have going on at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. And we're excited to have you join us on the journeys of each of those different pieces, and to, particularly as the Oregon legislative session begins this coming week, to connect with our advocacy team. And so with that said, I will hand it over to my colleague, Britt Conroy, to share about our climate-related policy priorities for this coming session. So Britt, go ahead.
Thanks, Charisse. Good to see many of you. I recognize a lot of names on the screen. Really great to be here. Senator Patterson, thanks for being with us. Charisse, would you like me to go through to pop up the slides, or would you like to post them as we go?
I can do that for you if you'd like. So.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. Everyone in my office knows it's better if the less contact I have with technology, the better for everybody usually. So appreciate it. So what Oregon is going to be on a different trajectory 5 weeks from now than today. The next legislative session starts on Tuesday. And we have the ability to pass some really impactful, community-centered, climate-friendly pieces of legislation. The Senator Deborah Patterson and others, are moving forward. And one of our goals at EMO is to provide a pathway for people of faith to learn about and become engaged in the kind of work, the kind of advocacy that is directly tied to our values, the kind of work that comes from the work that you've done today in this gathering. And so I just want to highlight a handful of bills before I send it over to Senator Patterson. One of the bills that we at EMO are pushing and are proud to be associated with is House Bill 4115. This is a Treasury transparency bill led by champions Representative Pham, Representative Holby, Senator Golden, and Senator Lawrence Spence. And it's both a pathway to a climate-friendly future in Oregon and a good governance bill. It simply said that the Treasury must publicly release a complete list of all portfolio holdings in every asset class. We as Oregonians deserve to know where our investments are being made, what they're supporting, and we deserve to know whether any of those investments that our government retirees and others depend on are wise when it comes to in this particular case, when it comes to whether there's climate risk associated with some of those investments. And this good governance bill is really crucial in moving us forward when it comes to having a moral set of investments that are also fiscally responsible. So we're really excited about that bill, and we'll be keeping you updated on that. The next bill that we're tracking is the reach for a bill on reach codes. This is the bill that is going to have it enables us to protect our livability now and our climate for the futures. We know that buildings are a significant and growing source of climate and air pollution, especially from burning methane gas and other fuels. So right now, the state of Oregon is really holding back certain communities from enacting more robust energy efficiency standards for buildings. And we need to give communities, we feel, the flexibility to choose climate-friendly building codes that will result in stronger energy efficiency building standards, and again, that will create a more livable community for us when it comes to air pollution and when it comes to our changing climate. So House Bill 1518 is coming out of the Senate Energy, I believe, right? Senate Committee on Energy Environment, and we'll be tracking that this session. The next bill, please, is one that is particularly timely. Sadly, tragically, this summer we lost members of our own community because of excessive heat, and farm workers. I will say, growing up, and today, still at our dinner table, before we eat, we thank our God and those who, for those who made our meal possible. And yet, in our state, we don't treat farm workers the same as all other workers, hourly workers, when it comes to overtime. We know that farm workers are on the front lines of the climate crisis. They're doing difficult, dangerous work, and yet they don't enjoy overtime pay. And the simple and sad reality is that this is an intentional exclusion that was part of the 1938 Federal Labor Standards Act. Ultimately, we believe a racist and exclusionary act. And the reality is that our farm work community faces the direct impacts of climate change daily, whether they're working through catastrophic fires or hazardous air quality levels, dangerous heat waves. And the reality is that they're also simply members of our community that deserve the protections that so many other workers enjoy. And so this bill would ensure that farm workers receive overtime wages after 40 hours a week, phased in over the next few years. And it says that farm workers also are part of our community and are valued members of our workforce. We have a whole string of folks that are actively moving this bill forward, including great partners, Representative Salinas, Representative Holby, Senator Taylor, Senator Frederick, Senator Jama has been a partner on so many things, Senator Manning, Senator Wagner. So the list is strong, and this is a bill that really will need the faith community's push, I think, to help get it across the finish line. And the final two bills are seen as a package of bills put forward by Representative Marsh and again Senator Jama. Again, when we think about this last summer, we experienced extreme heat waves, horrible air quality from fires, and really the culmination of many years of hotter summers and a worsening climate. And the consequences, as we spoke about at the previous bill, were just devastating and tragic, especially for renters in multifamily and manufactured homes. Dozens of people tragically lost their lives, and it raised the question of why can't we have better access to cooling, even for those that face barriers because of their low income or members of environmental justice communities. And the emergency heat relief package, these two bills, looks to remove those barriers and install simple life-saving technologies in the homes of our community members. So first, there's emergency heat relief for communities bill that will invest $5 million in efficient air conditioners and heat pumps, $10 million in heat pumps through Oregon Department of Energy that would prioritize low-income environmental justice communities, and also the emergency heat relief for renters. Just because you're renting your home doesn't mean that you should not have access to life-saving cooling. And this bill looks to again invest millions of dollars to purchase and install heat pumps or set up community cooling centers. So this package of bills, again, is an example of how we are about to set off on a new trajectory in Oregon because of the work that our legislature is doing in the weeks ahead. And part of that leadership will come from Senator Deb Patterson. Reverend Dr. Deborah Patterson is an ordained clergywoman in the United Church of Christ. She currently serves a 130-year-old rural congregational church in the Mid-Willamette Valley. She represents District 10, which, as of this moment, includes South and West Salem, Monmouth, Independence, Turner, Almsville, parts of Four Corners, and unincorporated East Salem. And prior to her work in the legislature and prior to her ministry, she held a number of roles in the healthcare field, including the executive director of the International Parish Nurse Resource Center, and also executive director of Northwest Parish Nurse Ministries. And she comes to the legislature bringing this diverse background and applying it to 4 crucial committees. She chairs Oregon's Senate Healthcare Committee. She sits on the Housing and Development Senate Committee that will hear one of those heat relief bills. She sits on Natural Resources and Wildlife Recovery, and she finds time also to sit on the Committee for Veterans and Emergency Preparedness. So Oregon and the legislature are really, really fortunate to have Senator Patterson engaged in this work, bringing values that make a difference for low-income and marginalized communities. We're just really excited to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much, Britt, and thank you, Sharice. It's really good to be here today, and hello to so many folks that I recognize your faces as well. I'll look forward to seeing you in person soon. Our building is open, and you are welcome to come in. I don't think we're scheduling group visits per se because of the Omicron variant, and our committees are all being held virtually. So we're going to kind of be in and out of the building, but certainly we want to talk with you, whether that be virtually or in person. So thank you so very much. As Britt mentioned, I am a congregational minister, been serving the United Church of Christ, Smyrna United Church of Christ, south of Canby for the last 8 years. Although I did just retire after 30 years of ministry on January 2nd in order to focus fully on this work, which I believe is also a call. And I would encourage all of you, I blame Reverend Alan Holt, also a congregational minister who's a member at Smyrna, for getting me into this, because he said it's really important for you to do outreach, not only visiting the sick and, you know, being involved in community affairs, but also being active in civic service as well. So I would encourage all of you to run for office too, just saying. The bills that you, EMO is supporting are certainly bills that I will be supporting as well. I'm not listed as a chief sponsor on any of them, but I am a regular sponsor of some of them. Of course, the committee bills are not sponsored, so I will be advocating for those too. I just really feel strongly about that. But before we go on, I'm so grateful to Sharice for starting with a quiet moment. So I'd like to start with a story. I know I have just a few minutes, but this is a story well worth sharing. It's in a book called, it's a new book, you might have already read it, The Book of Hope, written by Jane Goodall and with Douglas Abrams, who wrote the book of Joy, that was about with Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama. I hope you've read that. So this is the Book of Hope. And the story I want to share is on page 166. If you want to follow along in your pew Bible. The story is about we need each other. And it's a story about two gentlemen, both names, first names are Jia, their last names are Haixia and Wenki. And so I'm just going to go by their last names because their last name, Haixia was blind in one eye at birth from a cataract and lost the sight in his second eye from an accident a few years later. His friend Wenki lost his arms at age 3 by touching a down power line, and the injuries caused him to have his arms needed to be removed. When they were in their mid-30s, Haixia had a terrible depression, fell into a terrible depression, and thought he could look around him. He saw the degradation around their village from the quarrying, which had polluted the rivers, killing fish and other aquatic life, and the industrial emissions had polluted the air. And they thought, so Haixia was, Wenki told his friend that they just had to do something about this. And Haixia said, how could they do that? They didn't have any money, and he was blind, and Wenki had no arms. But Wenki had the answer. He would be Haixia's eyes, and Haixia would be Wenki's arms. And so they couldn't afford to buy seeds or saplings, so they decided to clone from branches cut from the trees. Haixia did the cutting, while Wenki directed him to the right place. And they walked from place to place with Haixia holding on to one of Wenki's empty sleeves. At first it went all wrong. They planted 800 trees and only 2 survived. But the next year they decided to try again. The rest of the villagers helped them. And over the years, let me just read it this. Though we are limited physically, our spirit is limitless. So let the generation after us and everyone else see what 2 handicapped individuals have accomplished. What they accomplished is that they have planted over 10,000 trees. Even after we're gone, they will see that a blind man and an armless man have left the village a forest. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be working together using our gifts, our talents, because we all have disabilities, but we all have abilities too, as we would always say at Smyrna every single Sunday in our call to worship. So let me focus on a couple more bills that I'd like to highlight. We have in Senate Bill 1534 is in the Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery Committee, which looks to establish policy around carbon sequestration in natural and working lands and waters. We also have let's see. Oh gosh, I could go through. I'm happy. What I'm going to do, Charisse, rather than I'm going to send you a list of bills that relate to I don't want to spend too much time on each of them. I'm just going to run through them quickly so nobody has to memorize anything. Our Representative Scouten, who's a nurse, has a bill to House Bill 4101 to make it so that when people are smoking outside the building, they have to move farther away. So we have better air quality in the buildings. Representative Helm is working hard on behalf of the animals. And so he has a bill, that House Bill 4130, that would give, I believe, $5 million to the Department of Transportation for wildlife corridors so that they wouldn't be run over by cars as much. And another bill, House Bill 4126, that would be a framework for a legislative policy to look at the present danger from zoonotic diseases, such as from mink farms, which were a possible carrier of COVID in Europe, and to monitor that situation. There are folks working around fish. There are two bills, Health Bill 4148, which would create a salmon habitat credit for people trying to restore salmon habitat on their lands, as well as House Bill 4145, which creates incubation boxes for salmon. There are two bills related to diesel, House Bill 4090 and House Bill 4141, for which I'm also a regular sponsor. The first bill would encourage state vehicles would have to be able to use blended fuel as well, biodiesel, and House Bill 4141 would establish a timeline for the restriction of the sales of diesel over the next 7 years. There's a bill, Representative Nathanson has House Bill 4055, which would do a tax on our forest products. And I'm really excited about the bill that would change Senate Bill 1546, which establishes the Elliott State Forest, which had been used for school funding, which would establish it as a research forest to be run by the Oregon State University. It'd be decoupled from school funding. Money would be put in to make whole the school funding, and then this state forest would be preserved from logging for income to rather use of the forest for research and learning to benefit our whole state. And I'm very pleased that part of the oversight of that includes First Nation people who have been on the advisory board to develop this proposal. There are a lot more bills that if you go on OLIS, the Oregon Legislative Information System, and type in the word that you're interested in, whether it be water or air quality or building codes, you'll find the bills that way. But I would just like to encourage your congregations all to develop an Earth Care Committee and to advocate at every level. For example, our church worked with the Soil and Water District, also elected officials, right? We got a grant to get trees to help plant those trees. We planted over 100 trees to reestablish a native white oak savanna. There are other grants from other partner organizations. We got a grant to develop solar panels at our church, which are now in place. So I would encourage you to develop an Earth Care Committee in your church. Work with your healthcare committee in your church. These are health issues, they're environmental issues, and they are issues of stewardship. And as people of faith, we all have to work together, whether we think we don't have much to offer or not. We do. We all do. We absolutely do. And when we work together, we can leave a forest behind. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Senator Patterson. Really appreciate you being willing to be with us today and to share these exciting moves in the legislature and some of your heart for this work. And it's exciting to think about what we can all do when we work together to do this work that can seem so daunting by ourselves, but we can make small and practical steps together and larger ones toward the future that we want to see. And so we'll be sending out a list of all of those bills that Senator Patterson just mentioned, as well as our policy priorities, and encourage you to get involved and speak up to your legislators to make sure that as Oregonians that we're doing our part for creating a more just and sustainable future for ourselves and our communities, our children, our grandchildren, and all the species that we share this planet with. So this is, we're coming towards the end of our time together. I guess we have maybe 2 minutes if people have a couple of questions in the chat that we could cover really fast. I don't want to get into depth on any of this legislation, but if you do have brief clarifying questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we can maybe address some of those. So I'll just pause for a moment here and see if any questions pop up in the chat, and then we'll do some closing things together. And as we consider what we are doing as people of faith in Oregon, I think it's important for us to recognize that we are all people who live here and share this land. And I love what Alan Euler said earlier about kind of cultivating that attitude of sharing, and that is one of the best ways that we can do this work, both climate resilience and disaster preparedness and response, is if we cultivate that attitude of community building and sharing in the good times, and have a community that is willing to share our resources with one another in our regular lives, then we are prepared and ready to also share and have the networks available to know how to help one another when disaster strikes. So I see comments in the chat, but I don't see questions. So we'll do the last couple things on our schedule for the day. And so I wanted to hand it over to my friend, Reverend Robin. Reverend Robin Hartwig, she offered to say a few words about EMO and Oregon Interfaith Power and Light. And I would also like to say thank you to Reverend Robin and Reverend Janet for their work with Ecofaith Recovery and partnering with us on so many things that we get to do together across the state to support climate justice work in faith communities. So Reverend Robin, would you say a few words?
Thank you. Full disclosure, I wasn't planning on saying anything to the full group at all today, but I just sent 5 minutes ago a chat to Charisse and said, this is amazing. You all have done such an incredible job of putting this together. This is so, I'm sick of Zoom meetings, but this is a Zoom meeting I would not have wanted to miss. Somebody, and I said in my chat, somebody's making a pitch for this awesome work at the end, right? If not, let me do it. So she said, oh yeah, gosh, we should have put that together, but we didn't. And it occurred to me, those are exactly the kind of people who I want doing this kind of work, are the people who are thinking about the work and not raising the money for the work. And that is people like Charisse and like Britt and like Michael Ellick and the rest of the team from EMO. I know with Ecofaith Recovery, we would not be a fraction of as effective as we are, only a fraction of it if it were not for the partnership with EMO. Senator Patterson, I'm so grateful to hear about all this legislation. And as you were talking about it, as a often overwhelmed parish pastor, I was like, oh my gosh, I want all of that. How do we help that be? How do we organize our church? Who do we, oh my gosh, we all have different representatives and senators, and when, and which ones are most important, because everybody's really busy. And what I know is that I've been getting emails and calls from Charisse and her team, and with support from Britt, around showing up for meetings that EMO has been organizing to try to help get this passed. And I know when I had a conflict and I couldn't make it, I'm like, Charisse, is this one super important because this is really difficult to change, or should I come to the next one? That there's somebody tracking this legislation, somebody saying, these are the most important senators and representatives. This is the moment where we really need the communities of faith. That, in addition to the theological grounding, the spiritual imagination I've received from this, the sense of hope and possibility that Janet and I were talking, and just like, oh, we have like a little hope after coming to this gathering in the midst of really difficult, overwhelming odds, and the personal outreach that they do to try to help organize us. And I just did my little calculation. I thought, gosh, what if all of us on here just agreed, like went to the website, which please, when you put that in there, will you? Like, Janet and I just have already agreed we're going to make an extra contribution to EMO creation justice work. So if you could please drop a link so we know where to go, because I don't have that link. But what if we all just like gave $10 a month, if we could spare a couple of coffees or whatever we might do with $10. And with the folks who are left, that would be $6,120. And for those of us who maybe could do more than $10 a month, I'm sure we could get to $10, $15, even $20,000 to sustain this work. Because what I've seen, and probably you've seen too many times too, is we get a lot of awesome ministries going on grant funding, because EMO does not have an offering plate every week to pass to us to remind us to give, or a weekly gathering to remind us. And so too often, amazing people like Charisse or Michael and Britt and the others at EMO get grant funded, and the grant funders only fund them for a few years, and then we lose them right after they've figured out who we are, had relational conversations with us, and figured out how to organize us. I don't want to lose any of this ministry. In fact, I want to see EMO build it. And so I'd just like to invite you to join Janet and me in making an extra contribution one time if you can. And if you could do monthly, that really sustains this kind of work. And Charisse and Britt and Michael and all the rest of the presenters today, thank you so much. This has been, I am sick, really sick of Zoom meetings, but this one, like I said, I really would not have wanted to miss. I feel better equipped, and you all have given me that gift, and I will pass it on to my community of faith. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Robin. I really appreciate you speaking up in that way. I had that pitch on my original outline and dropped it off the rest. And so I appreciate you bringing that up and being willing to share in such a passionate way. And thank you so much for all that you do to work with us and support this work in your own communities as well. So we are reaching the end of our time together, and I am so grateful to all of you for all of the ways that you have showed up here, whether as a presenter, thank you so much for taking your time and energy to present today, or as a participant to come and support this work and learn and grow and consider how the wisdom from your own tradition is calling you to do the work of our time. So I hope this time has been inspiring and encouraging to you, and a little bit convicting of the work that is ahead of you. So with that, I will pass it over to our Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon Interim President, Reverend Kano, to give a closing blessing.
Thank you so much. I mean, I don't know how I follow Pastor Robin, and this has been an extraordinary moment. And I'm just looking outside of my window. It was sunny and bright when this meeting started. Now it's getting chilly and windy. And I just think it means that we are kind of getting towards the end of the day. And I just wanted to echo a few things. First of all, the gratitude for all of this convening and even the centering, as Charisse brought us into that place of feeling and thinking, reflecting of our own personal experiences of the climate challenges that we face, and to recall how Rabbi Eli Herb brought us into the covenant that God has for all of life, and how Quiltum Psalm sang us into his petition and his prayer for us to protect Mother Earth and to do it together. And we heard also from Avery that we take the rubble of those fallen walls and bring the stones back to life, and to do it as Nehemiah's neighbors, not just as the soldiers. That we actually look at the learning of those Ethiopian forest churches, that the sacred spaces are sacred to all and sustained by all creatures, living things in our collective biodiversity. And that we realize also that our theology and our understanding, our faith understandings and spirituality is essential as we resource those educational materials, that we come in from our heart as well to think of the words and the visual, and the images, the music, the art that will also help to inspire as we move to respond to preparedness, restoration, relief, response. And may we continue to be grateful for all of us here, all with whom we live with and work with, and continue to be awed by what we shared today. So much knowledge and wisdom and experience, and that we open our hearts in seeing things in a new way, that we are inspired in new ways and are able to act in different ways. And that we continue to do this together, connections and relationships within our circles. Y a veces también encontrar, invitar otros para entrar en ese mundo, to widen our circles for others who need to be with us and to hear their voices on the global, national, regional, state, and local levels. So I ask that the Holy One, the sacred of many names, of expressions, the Pachamama, the Gaia, the Sophia, and the Science, who breathed all living beings, all into life. All into life. May we be inspired to move forward with such hope and grace, compassion and love. Amen.
I note before everybody leaves that someone with the great name of Emotech1 did put a link in the chat that one can click on and go to providing some financial support. So encourage folks to do that before the call ends so you can get access to that.
Thank you so much, Jeff, another member of our Creation Justice Committee. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. Thank you, Andrea, for your closing blessing there. And thanks everyone for participating. We'll see you hopefully on our advocacy team and our other efforts throughout the year and at next year's summit, hopefully in person next time, right? Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.